Salete, and welcome to this week's one and only virtual mentoring hangout. We weren't able to have one on Saturday because of some logistical things that were going on with a bunch of us, but I'm excited that we're able to see each other today, and I'm really excited about our topic. As you know, we're calling this week Building and Keeping Momentum and Focus, and the idea is that, well, it's late August if you're watching this live. If you're watching this live, it's August the 30th. And I'm happy to see that Alan is here. So, Alan.
Hi, Justin. I'm actually going to be working on something while the call goes on, so I'm going to keep the camera off, but I'm glad to be here.
No problem. I'm glad that you're here. And please do, feel free to leave the camera off by all means. I was working on something earlier, and I went to scratch my nose, and suddenly there was a fountain of blood. So I thought that I was going to have the camera off as well. Audience, I'm sorry about that. It was probably a little bit too much information. Fortunately, it stopped. And I am also happy to see that George is here. Solid George.
So, Justin. Great to see you.
Great to see you. I'm glad that you are finally able to join us for one of these. It's an exciting topic for me personally because of the time of year that it is. In my world, my classes with the gifted homeschoolers start tomorrow, so I'm really looking forward to that. And then my classes with my distance classes with the students in New Jersey start after Labor Day, like classes do in New Jersey. So it's the beginning of the school year for me. But for my own children, well, for my one child who's still in school rather than college, because I'm not old. I'm not old at all, but I'm still 20. No, I'm not. But my daughter has been in school for, she just finished her second week of her freshman year at college, and my son started back school last Wednesday. And so this is the end of the first full week for the first week for him. So he was pretty tired the other day, and as you might imagine. And of course, at the beginning of the year, it is so easy to have all these grand expectations and plans, right? It's going to be totally different from every other year. I'm going to do everything differently. None of those old bad things that happened before will ever happen again. I will not do that one thing, right? And then, that's not all that hard to say in August. Then along comes September. Then along comes October. And sometimes by September or October, we discover that, much to our surprise, we have gone and done that one thing that we said we were never going to do again, right? And it's different things, different years. One year, I promised I was not going to lose my temper, no matter what any student said. That didn't even make it, and that made it until Labor Day. I was, teaching in a place where school started on August 24th or 25th, so we had a week or so, and then, of course, some kid comes and says some just utterly ridiculous thing. And while I did not express I did not at the student. That's not what I had said. I had said, I am not going to even lose my temper on the inside. Well, of course we all know what happened then. And there are part of building and keeping momentum and focus, to return to a more serious topic, is that is thinking about the kinds of commitments that we make to ourselves and not making the ridiculous claim that we'll never feel angry no matter what happens. But there's another piece, though, that I think is important, because sometimes we have really good plans and we're going to use more oral Latin, or we're going to not rely so much on the textbook, or we're not going to fall into that routine where we always give the vocabulary quiz on Thursday and the test on Friday. And then sure enough, we look at those last couple weeks of lesson plans, and boom.
Get it.
Oh, I was just having a weird thing that just happened. Anyway, I hope that she can join us. A person's starting a hangout, but they need to join this one. Anyway, so we've all had that experience, I think. So my real thought as I was reading the post this week in Latin Teacher Idea Exchange was, how do we keep the good momentum going, both by making realistic kinds of promises to ourselves, but also by not just falling into the rut of the same old, same old. So what do you guys think?
I actually, to be honest, am not very good at this at all. I set things up and I get going, and then you know, one thing leads to another. I get busy, the kids get busy, something doesn't work right, and I sort of slip back into my old routine. The only thing I know that's worked well for me in preventing it is just being really conscious about that and constantly double checking myself. But I don't have a lot of good thoughts on this particular issue.
I have to say I picked this topic because it's one that I struggle with. It wasn't directly addressed in this week's post, but I read everybody's great intentions and great plans and the cool things that they'd made for Chapter 1 of their textbook or for their first unit. I kept thinking, I do this, and then I have this grandiose plan of continuing to do this, and then sure enough, I fall back into that one routine. Just a second. Oh, here's what we need. Just a second. I'm going to grab this invitation link. And Elizabeth should be joining us in just a little bit. She said she couldn't find the participate link, which, depending on the browser and a bunch of other things, is a very easy thing to do. I had a grandiose plan that I was going to have made this much easier by using the new freestanding Hangouts app rather than the one that's embedded into Google+, and that sure didn't happen, partly because that's harder to use than I had realized, and partly because of, force of habit. Yay, Elizabeth is here! Zoe!
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 Zoe, Elizabeth!
So we're talking about keeping the momentum and focus going with the start of the new year, and Alan and I have both just admitted that this is a thing with which we struggle. I find that I struggle with it a lot because I try to have realistic expectations, and after doing this for 23, yeah, this is number 24, isn't it? It sure is. How did that happen? But after all of that time, I still find that, I'll say I'm only going to make one big change. Well, last year the one big change was teaching purely online rather than in a physical classroom, which meant that everything changed. And so a couple times in November and February, I did find myself falling into the rut of the same old, same old. But fortunately, my students, who were new to me, they did not know that it was the same old, same old. The only one who knew was me. Now, sadly, that is no longer true, right? Because they know me, so they know what the same old will be. So I can't get away with that. But what do you, so George or Elizabeth, what do you guys do to avoid the rut of the same old, same old?
One of the things, do I click somewhere?
Oh no, you're good.
I'm
I was
good.
just
Okay.
turning off my mic for.
Yes. Sure. One of the things I do is engage in conversations with people like Justin Schwam.
Why, thank you.
Yes, because I think I totally agree with what you're saying about keeping our expectations of ourselves realistic, and I also feel like I'm a person who runs on ideas. I guess we're all motivated by different things as teachers, and I'm motivated by ideas and how I think ideas could help people, and so it really I've sort of become a professional development junkie because I realize that sort of helps feed my energy, and you need a certain amount of outside energy in order to, because teaching is tiring when you do it right.
That is so true. Elizabeth, before I share the thought that I just had about that, what do you do?
Well, my biggest issue is less of falling into a particular rut and more of a feeling pulled between my different classes because I teach all levels. And so I'll, get really invested in this project with my ones, and I'll start to feel like, yeah, I'm doing all this stuff with my ones and with my fours. What's going on with my threes and my twos? I'm in a rut with them. So it's not like a whole month rut. It's not like a whatever. It's that I put myself on kind of coast or autopilot or whatever for one of my groups because I'm so invested in something cool that's going on with another group. And so one of the things that I've tried to do for myself is just I like surround myself. I have a Post-it note right here, little just things that I do that refresh me, that like refresh my class. So doing little communicative things or surveying the class, because they'll tell you, like my kids are really honest with me and they're respectful about it, which is great. But they'll be honest with me. They'll be like, Magistra, we're bored with this thing that you're doing right now. They're more comfortable saying that on paper than in person. And so doing little mini surveys, I think, helps to touch base with my students, and they'll say, we want to play more games. They always want to play more games. Or we want to eat more food. Like, okay. But some of the suggestions that they have are really, really good. Things like, we noticed that last chapter you had a great PowerPoint that walked through each event in the textbook, and you don't have one for this chapter. Cool. So their requests help a lot in terms of like refocusing me. So.
Oh.
I really like that. Yes.
Yes.
George, say what you were about to say.
Well, I'm thinking about this is a common scenario for Latin teachers, juggling multiple preps. More preps than anybody else in the building, it seems sometimes. And I've often thought, especially when it comes time to, say, review for exams or something like that, a lot of times I think, gosh, if I'm going to land 3 planes on the carrier at the same time, 2 of them need to be on autopilot, some form of autopilot, because I just only have so much space in my head. And so I guess I sort of alternate which classes those will be. So maybe, Justin, part of my answer to your question would be I don't always maintain, but I try to coast in different preps at different times. And when I say coast, I really mean rely on my experience and things that I've done before.
Another thing that I've found that helps with that, and that's actually helped me feel more comfortable integrating like authentic Latin into the lower levels, is just like if I'm really pumped because I'm teaching, I was teaching for Persius 212, right? Like I was having a great time. I don't know why. I felt like I was nailing it, and that was for my threes. I left that stuff up on the board for my twos, and I was like, wait, you guys are on, we do Lingua Latina, so you guys are on Capitulum Duodecimum. Look at all this armor, right? Like, that's not in your book, but here's all this armor. Like, can you draw a picture of this or that? It was fun, and it was, like, pretty spontaneous. Like, I was not in my lesson plan for that day. But that kind of brought the energy back into that class because it was just residual, really, from me being excited about teaching the Persius to my threes. So, but that also has helped with feeling more comfortable, presenting authentic Latin, so to the lower grades, to the lower levels. So,
and that reminds me of the conversation, Alan, I think you were there. Actually, I think you had the idea that we had of having common themes that recurred from year to year but went into greater depth, so that you could each time bring in new and additional authentic readings. If you started out with a unit about, a sort of a grand unit of the house and family. Well, there's all kinds of things that you could bring in that are both accessible to a beginner with some help, but are also accessible to a more advanced student. And if you rotate those things out from year to year, it still feels fresh, and then there are connections made across the levels. I'm kind of excited by a combination of students that I've not worked with before at one of the distance schools. There are 11 Latin 5 students whom I know, and there are 9 Latin 3 students whom I don't know, and they're in one class because, you know, that's what the district was willing to do. So I know what the threes did when they were in Latin 2, and I've met them. I've worked with them a couple of times, maybe over the course of the year, but they had a different instructor, and so I'm excited to get to know them. I'm excited to bring them into this larger group, and then I'm excited by the possibilities of what the two groups will be able to bring to each other, because they will have common themes. They'll be reading different stuff, and then they'll be sharing stuff that's related to those themes with each other. And my goal is that the threes will read some things that the fives have not read, and of course obviously the fives will read plenty of things that the threes haven't read. So it will be very different. I can't just reuse my lesson plans and my document of daily links from last year, and also the school changed its schedule in a good way. So, so there's a bunch of good new things going on there. And then with my homeschool kids, every new group is a new adventure. So I'm really looking forward to them, and that keeps me young and fresh in some ways. But I think that what you were saying, George, about coasting at different times in different ways is important, because nobody can be 100% creative and innovative 100% of the time. Or if they can, I haven't met them.
I've tried. I can't do it. But yeah, it may be kind of like if you do an endurance sport, gosh, learning all the details about how you pace yourself. Sorry, I was done.
Oh no, that really is a great analogy, actually, because I was thinking about that. It's not a teaching is not a speed sport. It's not a sprint. It is an endurance sport, and learning that, because there are lots of other things that people do. I mean, even being a college student is more like a sprint, right? And then all of a sudden, people stop being a college student and they become a teacher. And even if they've been a grad student, there's still some sprint aspects to graduate school. But then all of a sudden, there's this move from, say, okay, so they've up to middle distance by then. They've been running the 800, and somebody says, okay, now this week we're going to run a marathon. Well, there's a big difference between, I can do it. I think I could still walk an 800 anyway. I can't even think a marathon, right? I am old and fat. And if you don't think so, it's because, well, you're being polite. No, I mean, I am middle-aged and portly, as I say to my dog. He and I are both middle-aged and portly. And we, there's some things that we can't do that we, might have been able to do when we were younger, and less portly. But, how do we then, building on that analogy, what are some things, and I love the idea of surveying students, because that is a thing that I do regularly, and I learned it out of desperation. I had a class that I just felt like I wasn't connecting with them several years ago, and I thought, well, I got really good stuff from them from that survey we did at the beginning of the year, and we just seemed to be struggling for a while. We were finishing up the first unit that we had done, and I could tell they weren't with me. So I thought, okay, we're just going to do another survey. And they told me we liked this thing, and we haven't done enough of this thing, and we don't like this thing, and we've done it like every day. So why are we doing that?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Elizabeth.
No, that's the same kind of things that I see in a lot of the classes that I have kind of a normal, like an even keel relationship with. If I start seeing things go down, that'll be, I act like it's a quiz though. I say, everybody take everything off your desk, grab a pen or a pencil, and they're like, and I pass out a piece of paper, and I say, don't put your name on it. I'm like, all right, I want you to give me, and sometimes it's like I'll think about it, and I'll come up with something overnight, and I'll have a PowerPoint up, and it's like, the first thing is, what's your favorite thing that you've learned the last week, and what's, what activity do you miss, like, do you want, or whatever, and it's more prepped like that. And other times I'll just say, like, what's going on? And sometimes I get feedback that it's like, teacher, it's not you, and it's not this class, it's just physics is, like, really bad right now, and we're all in AP Physics. And you're like, okay, well, what can I do, in this class? Because I teach in a magnet school, so the kids are very concerned about their grades, and they're bringing in a whole lot of stuff that's not just your class too. So sometimes momentum levels, like, you'll be ready for something active and they're not. And if you have a few days of that, that's okay. But if you have weeks of just oh my God, guys, that's where I have a hard time. How do I plan lessons for that? How do I sustain my level of interest and energy when I'm preaching to a bunch of kids who are worn out from other classes and from other stuff, all of which is understandable. College applications, AP exams, things like that. That's where I want some more help and some more kind of. What do you guys do? Do you see that happening?
Oh yeah, oh definitely.
Okay.
And I think one of the things that really helps me is just to be mindful of the school calendar. I really, when I had taught at the same school for a really long time, I just knew this stuff, right? But then when I made the change to the distance work, I'm dealing with multiple different districts that have different schedules and different calendars and different stuff going on. Fortunately, both of which last year and and all of which this year seem to be really good at saying what they're doing and having a good detailed calendar on the district website, and communicating well with their folks, and they remember that I exist, which is nice. But if it's a school, like most schools, it's got a calendar somewhere, and just being mindful of okay, it's homecoming week. Oh, yeah. Or it's it's the big band competition week. No wonder everybody and we all know how many Latin students are in band because they all are, or it's there's this huge forensics tournament. Well, that's obviously going to affect a lot of kids, depending on your program. And whatever the other big extracurricular things are that all of your kids do, knowing when the competitions are, knowing when the deadlines are for those, knowing, what colleges are my seniors applying to, and what are the deadlines for that. Well, those, right? Because they come sidling up to you, begging you for a recommendation 3 days before it's due, and you're looking at them thinking, have I taught you nothing? No, you're not thinking that. You're thinking, of course I will write this. Sure I will. And then, just all the other things. But I think the calendar, and knowing when the SAT dates are, and knowing in the spring about when, which AP class, which AP exams are on which day, not just, this is AP week, avoid things in general, but, this is AP English Lit day, so of course all my seniors are going to be exhausted. Or, okay, yeah, microeconomics and Chinese, that's really not going to affect us today, but oops, European history is tomorrow, so forget about that. And it's those kinds of things that, we probably all do, but new teachers may or may not know, or teachers who are new to a school may or may not know. And yay, Chris is here. Solly, Chris. It's good to see you.
I had to shut off the thing for a second there because I was watching it in the regular version without being in the Hangout, and then I had to switch over to this one because I was busy doing stuff for school because my classes start tomorrow. So I wanted to listen while I was finishing up something and then finally join in for a little bit.
Well, I'm glad that you joined us. Yeah, it is that time of year. Classes, I was saying earlier that I've got one set of classes starting tomorrow and then another set the following week. And it is an exciting time. And it also is a very, very busy time for.
Very much.
Very, yes. So, Chris, do you have any thoughts about things that you do that either preserve momentum that you've begun at the beginning of the year, or avoid the problem of biting off more than you can chew?
It sounds a lot to me like I'm having the same sort of issues that everybody here has been saying as I've been listening, and that we all kind of fall into that trap, which makes me feel a little bit better knowing that I'm not the only one that thinks I'm going to do all these great new things like this year. I'm trying to do more CI and more sort of spoken Latin and making things a bit more understandable to the kids, and reading Latin more than just randomly translating stuff. And I'm just hoping that I don't fall into the trap of doing the same old grammar translation stuff. But the thing is just trying to figure out how to keep doing all these new things you want to do, and either, number one, not get too swamped yourself, or number two, just think, oh, well, the kids aren't doing exactly what I want them to do, so I'm going back to the old ways. And so I'm just hoping that I can find out from you guys some ways to make it a little bit easier to stick with my plan for the year.
Oh, sure.
And so, Ellie, as you join us, yay! We've got a huge group today. This was a hot topic. I'm sorry I couldn't run one of these yesterday, but I was just completely impossible. I looked at my calendar, I looked at my day on Friday afternoon, and I was like, nope, not going to happen. And then I looked at Facebook on Saturday morning. It's like, yep, nope, tell them it's not going to happen. But this is an important topic. So, Ellie, what do you do to keep momentum or to avoid biting off more than you can chew? Or is that just one of those things that we all struggle with?
Well, last year I pretty much had no momentum because I was coming into a difficult situation. This year, I'm not sure. I guess I'm experimenting with CI and TPRS for the first time and trying to go full on into a new curriculum, and so far it's going well. But my plan for keeping momentum up as the semester continues is just slowly introducing different activities. And I also need to figure out something to do for the kids who get it like the first or second time I say a verb and they don't want to hear the other 73 times. So if anyone has ideas for keeping the high ability ones engaged, that would be useful. I don't have any great ideas for keeping momentum for everyone else, unfortunately.
So to Eleanor's and Chris's point, in terms of experimenting when you're dealing with new techniques, what I've done over the summer, I've gotten together with another friend who's starting her second full year of teaching, and I've sat down and I've listed what are the activities that I do with different level students. Like, what would I ask a student who's super struggling to do as opposed to a student who's doing really well. And I have actually itemized all that stuff in this. And I know that it sounds really sort of intense and weird, but when you're sitting outside, you're on the deck, the dog's feet, it's a lot easier to do than during the school year. You just think, what do I even do every day? What's going on? And that's how you fall back on hey guys, I'm just going to put some vocab on the board, So I have this list of what are some activities that I do with authentic Latin and what are some things that I do with sort of what I call chapter Latin. So when we're reading Orbert, and even something just as simple as reminders to myself as I start a unit, like what question words do they have? What can I ask them? Because that's something that I fall back on. That's my rut, is just giving them Latin and then asking a ton of questions in Latin, which is helpful, but after a while you start to get the individual response thing is not as interesting, and if they're not all chorally responding, that's not super cool either. So itemize it. Oh, I can see on the sidebar. But yes, but itemizing things to me, just kind of like my list that's there. If I give myself something to reference later, then when I am struggling and when I don't kind of understand where to go, I look back on this list and I go, oh wait, I have a ton of options, and I feel that kind of literally inspiration. I feel like I have my breath back, and I can go and plan for the next day or the next unit or make the next activity. So.
Yeah, I'm a list maker as well. And then the other thing that, of course, I do with my online kids is that everything's in a Google Drive folder that, or gets moved into a Google Drive folder and shared with them. So that means that there are all these things in Google Drive. And then, and I used to have, when they were all on, on the desktop computer, and then backed up onto the flash drive and then backed up onto the CD-ROM, because, I mean, you guys know, right? So it used to be that there was this very elaborate system of folders and subfolders. And then one day I realized I don't need that anymore, because tagging, right? Because you can do that and search. So instead, I have it default to sort chronologically, and then I can sort it in other ways too. But I'll go and look and see what I did at the equivalent point, not last year, because I know what I did last year, but what did I do a couple of years ago? Oh, I don't even remember writing this assignment, but this is a really nice assignment. It's too long, or it's too short, or, why did I use this word that isn't, even that I don't even care whether students know? But then, then you make some kind of an adaptation to that. But it's not like the sort of the stereotype, which I did used to fall into long ago, of, the perfectly organized file cabinet. Well, it was never perfectly organized, but there was a file cabinet, and there was a hanging file for each chapter in the textbook, and then there was a folder for each activity that I had written, or thing that was reproducible, and so then I would just sort of, as I was planning out that unit, I would just sort of stare at what existed and think, I hate that one, and I'm not going to ever use that again. Oh yeah, oh really, did I write a worksheet about that? Well, that's good to know. So somewhat reproduce that online, except in a more flexible way, and then also I can look and say, well, what type of assignment haven't we done in a while? Oh, we haven't done one of these assignments where I pull a picture from from the book, or just a picture from the Triskelina project, which for me it's not hard to pull those pictures, or a picture from from whatever, and have kids generate a list of as many vocabulary items as they can that relate to the picture, which they love doing, whether they are in Latin 1 or Latin 5. They just adore doing that kind of an activity. And so I am reminded, do that. Or I'll say, oh yeah, that thing where we pick a category of vocabulary and we sort of make a word web thing with it. And they love making those, but we haven't done that in 3 months. Oh, maybe we should do that again. Maybe I should ask kids to pick a category, and or have several different categories and have each group pick one, and then they can share it. Or what kind of reading activity have we not done in a very long time? Maybe I've asked a lot of questions, but I haven't had kids create questions in forever. Maybe we've done a lot of illustration but no acting, and I have a group that love to act, and so why haven't we acted something? Maybe I have a group that doesn't mind voicing characters but doesn't want to stand up, so we can use one of the many cartoon or puppet apps that are out there and do that. And it's just a question of, as we've all been saying, listening to kids and thinking about what do they want, what has worked well, or what might work well in similar situations. But I'm also mindful of the new teachers that are watching, and I'm so glad that Ellie and Elizabeth are sharing their lists. My list is on paper and isn't shareable right now, but I'll put it together. And I think that's a topic that that will, if we can share these on Idea Exchange also, and ask people, what are some favorite activities that that you guys do that work well, and what are the circumstances where they work well that you'd be willing to share. Hopefully we can get a whole bunch of ideas together, for the new folks, because they don't have that file, they don't have that list of resources and things that work, and I keep thinking about that. Oh yes. Yes. Yay. And yes, George, I know I've heard about some of the incredible projects that your kids do. Could you talk about some of those? And unmute yourself first, because you're currently muted.
Sorry about that. Yeah, maybe I should talk about one I haven't mentioned on the exchange. This is because the larger topic of sort of how do we keep the momentum going. Some of these sort of arise spontaneously. So at the beginning of the year, we were reviewing, and review doesn't seem really inspirational, right? There are these times, things that you do that where you feel the momentum dragging. Well, we came across the word piskina because we were using eke, right? Word meaning fish pond. So we said, you know, guys, we should make up a word, and we should propagate it through the internet. And so we made the word impiscinate, and I Googled first, and it got no hits. And then so each day we would take a little time out of the day, and we'd grab laptops, and we would, or you know, and some kids started doing this at home too. And we would go into chat rooms or Wikipedia or whatever, and I told them just use the word as if it's already a thing. So you know, they'd go onto fishing websites and talk about impiscinating their lures, and so we got and our goal was to get somebody else whom we did not know to use the word. Then we'd be validated, right? So what ended up happening was they generated a lot of hits on Google, which has since disappeared, and it caused what I like to call an international controversy because one of the curators of Wikipedia got really mad at us and kept and kicked the students off there. And he said that Wikipedia was not the place for neologisms, and that my behavior as a teacher was reprehensible for encouraging students to do such a thing. So we learned about reprehendere, reprehensible, and we learned about the Greek roots of neologism, and but the real thing that I remember is just the energy that it brought to my class, and it was just a little bit every day. It was just a taste, but it sort of sustained them through everything else, and me too.
That is really exciting. I love that story, and I had heard it face to face at ACL, but I'm glad that you shared the full version because there were some details that I didn't know about it. I didn't know about the Wikipedia editor being so angry. Does he think that there are no words create? Where does he think that words come from?
We were talking about Frindle in that context. Yes, because the students started asking the same question, and what happened in the end was he blogged about us, right? So in the process, he used our word, and the mission was accomplished. Yeah, and actually, a bunch of my students, and then some of my former students, got in the act and started piling in on the comments to try to convince him that this was a legit thing after all.
Well, just because Shakespeare did it and everybody else, every English author, doesn't mean it's okay, right?
Right. You have to get a license first.
Yeah, you do from the Académie Anglaise, right? Wait, no, there isn't one. Oops.
Yeah.
Yeah,
but it raised good conversations about how language is always evolving and such, and the things that we want to talk about with Latin students anyway. I'm going to mute now.
Oh, no, that's excellent. But don't feel like you have to mute. But that is such a wonderful example of a spontaneous thing that can grow. I mean, sometimes we have these carefully planned, long-term projects, and then sometimes it's that one thing that you discover, that one thing that one kid said, and you think, let's just explore this. Oh my goodness! It was a long time ago. It was well over, I think it was 10 or 11 or so years ago. I had this Latin 4 class, and we had read part of what was then the Virgil AP reading list, because they were going to be taking AP when they were seniors, and they didn't. They wanted to decide, so we read some Virgil and some Ovid and some Catullus and some Horace and a little bit of Cicero, so that we could make a good choice as to which of the then available options we were going to follow. But we had read, of course, part of the selections from Aeneid 4, some of them, and they said, Mr. Schwann, they said, we haven't made a video in a long time. They were a video production loving class. And I said, okay, that's true, we haven't made a video. They said, and normally we make small group videos. Yes, this is true. They said, we've never made a whole class video. I said, yes, that is indeed true. We never have. I'm scared but intrigued. Tell me more. And they said, well, we should do one. We should make one. but it should be a little bit different. And I said, okay, I mean, there were like about 12 of them. It would certainly be doable to have all 12, to have 12 roles. And I said, so what should we do? And they said, well, you should go sit down and we should talk about it, and then we'll get back to you. And they said, okay, so what if we made, and this was when the reality show Cheaters was new, and several of them watched it. So they decided that Cheaters Carthage Edition would be a really good idea. And so they created this thing. I did have a role of being the camera person, but that is all that I did, was film them. And we ended up in multiple locations around the school. They scripted it. It was an incredible project and a very strange project. And I still have the tape and something to play it on. And so as they are all closing in on 30 and getting married and stuff and sending me things, I occasionally threaten them with that tape. Threaten. They're like, oh, you still have it. Can I have a copy of it? I'm thinking, I was supposed to embarrass you. What was going on with this? But it was a wonderful project, and it really did just emerge from the fact that they said, we haven't done a video in a long time, and we should do a large group video because we've really never done one of those. And then it turned into, an incredible thing that I still have, the tape years later. I think the tape is, I do have a thing to play it on. I haven't played it in a few years, but it should be that should be rectified sometime soon. I won't upload it to YouTube without all of their permission, but So those kinds of things happen. But what are other ways, or I guess maybe we could look at it differently. What, other than just being overworked and overwhelmed and the October effect and the February effect, what are some other things that are momentum stoppers and momentum destroyers, and what are some ways around them? And don't forget to unmute if you're currently muted.
I'll jump in and say fear is a momentum stopper, and I guess we all know that. But one thing I've been doing differently in my classroom in recent years is I've started just having discussions with my students about fear and when we're afraid and what we're afraid about and how that affects how we learn and how we feel about that. And just talking about it seems to diminish some of the power, at least put us on the same side of the problem.
Yeah, I think that fear and that kind of anxiety, and a lot of that, I know that you had a chat last week about assessing, but large-scale assessments do that a lot. And so the units that I felt I've had the most momentum on are ones where I actually gave a midway, like, I hate the word quest, but I gave like a kind of I do lots of mini quizzes, and my kids, only a few kids actually mind that. A lot of them find that helps their grade, because it'll be 3 points or 5 points, or it's not anything to actually be worried about, and they know that they're a check, and they know that they get dropped. But when it comes to a bigger test, and they have to sit down and study, and like, what exactly is on the test, that's like the whole class like deflates. So when we've had smaller assessments and there's sort of like less pressure on each one of them, I've had kids talk to me and say that that's a lot, that's better. And then I've also had kids who do well cramming and they don't like that system. And so each one of them likes to express that. I feel like there's some good moment there to teach, like, to them and the subjunctive, like, if only, and to do some kind of statement like that. Maybe I'll try that with my threes this year. But to kind of, but you're right, to give them room to express that makes a pretty big change. So.
Yeah, I think fear, overcoming the fear, and I hadn't really put that into words until you guys said that, and because fear is also a thing with students too, of course. Sully, Nancy, it's good to see you, and I know that Nancy is beginning the first year. Um, and I also know from talking to Nancy that we were talking about being overwhelmed with preps. She teaches 4 classes and has 4 different preps. Because, yeah. Um, and so that's a thing. But fear is a thing, and fear is not just our fears, but students' fears of the unknown is another thing that I think we have to be cognizant of, especially, new students coming in, or if you have moved to a different school or a different teaching context. Chris, I'm impressed with your 5. I did one time. I think I had, how many was that? I lost track. But there was one class that had 3 distinct reps in it, and that was a joy. By which I think I've defined the word joy in an interesting way. It actually was a wonderful group to work with. Yeah, eventually there were 4. It was a weird year, and I had a Latin 4, 5, and AP group. And the 4s were doing their things. The 5s were doing stuff in lieu of AP. Most of the APs were doing one thing, but some of the APs had already, it was back when when there were 2 exams and you could take them both, and some of them had already taken the one AP exam and were taking another one and prepping for another one. They had done virtual and were doing Latin Lit, and they had their choice of, I told them, obviously we're all going to read the Catullus part together, but in fact, we all end up reading all the Catullus part together. But once they were doing choice author stuff, I said, just you tell me who you want to work with. And one group wanted to do Horace, and one group wanted to do Cicero. And I was like, okay. It was fun. Yeah, Nancy, you do actually have 5 preps, don't you? 5 and 4 classes. That's right. That's a lot. That is a lot, especially when you are new. So we need to be cognizant of your energy level and of fear of the unknown for you and for your students and everybody. So fear of the unknown. Should we talk about that, or is it too scary? What do you guys think?
I think it's really important to talk about it. I started out, speaking of preps, my very first year was a special nightmare. I was doing, like you were talking about with your different exams for AP. I had AP and IB in the same class, AP, IB, and Latin 3 in the same class. And the students who were in their 4th year were really, they had a really low skill level. But just generally, I think every new teacher goes through a lot. And it's very easy for teachers who are out of it to go, yeah, everyone goes through that, pat on the back, and then walk away. The best phrase that I heard as a new teacher was, it's like driving in the fog. You can only see a few feet ahead, but you can actually get home the whole way that way. And so there are going to be times where you can see like 20 feet ahead of you, and there are going to be times where it clears up and you get to see, maybe a mile up there, but you're going to get through it. And thankfully there's a lot of resources, and you're already connected to them that are going to help with, like, when you're grasping at straws. So good luck. But I do think that was kind of my guiding. Like, that little phrase kept me going.
That is a great phrase. And it doesn't just apply to new teachers either, because there are those years when you think that you know where you're going, and then the fog descends for internal reasons or external reasons.
Oh, yes.
Oh, yes.
Oh, yes. And I was just thinking about, I want to say, oh, gosh, Nancy, it gets better. It gets so much. It will get better. But also to remind all of us who some of us have been teaching for a while too, exactly what you just said, Justin. The fog descends, At the times something happens, somebody loses their job, you take over for them, or I found with fear of the unknown, when I was going into some of these side projects where I was picking up the computer languages so I could build stuff for my classes, I ran into things there that I didn't know how to do in a phase when I was comfortable with my teaching. But here's why I brought it up. In confronting I found myself in the same role as my students, where I was having fear of, hey, am I going to be able to do this? Am I going to be able to, I know I'm smart, but am I going to be able to figure this out? And it occurred to me that this was really helping my teaching, because it put me back in a place where I realized I needed to start these conversations with my students.
I'm glad you said that, George, because that is the danger of having been at a school for a long time and being well known and being a known quantity. There's a lot of good things about that, but one of the disadvantages of it is that you forget what it's like to be a beginner. And yet every year as a Latin teacher, we are dealing with beginners because, even if we're not teaching Latin 1, if we are fortunate enough to have like a department with more than one of us, we're getting new students whom we didn't teach in the past. And if we're it, which most of us are, then it's that much harder because we are always getting the new ones, and yet we also have the old ones who return to us, and sometimes we forget what it's like to be the new person, and they don't know what this one procedure is that we always do in class. They've never done it before because they've never been in class before. They don't know what the system is, and they need to be shown, and we need to practice it. Or sometimes you discover to your shock and horror, oh, this has worked for such a long time, this one particular activity, but it's not going to work this year at all. Oh, Nancy, you were talking about your student and the placement test, but would you be willing to share the sentence and how the student translated it?
Yes. So there was a sentence that really should have been construed. What was it? When Hannibal was a boy of 9 years. That's right. Which I would think, based on the Latin, it was very simple. But this student, her answer was, Where is Hannibal? It has been 9 years. Which, there were similar amusing mistakes, and she didn't really seem to grasp the concept of the genitive, which I think maybe is why I'm leaning towards the idea that she might have used Cambridge and just not taught very well in those first couple of years.
I have, ever since you told me that, just randomly to my mind comes, where is Hannibal? I will never think. I will probably never forget that as I think my favorite equivalent moment of just sort of feeling doom. I was a new teacher and was using Cambridge actually, and it would have been about halfway through the year because we were most of the way through the Unit 1 book, and we'd gotten to the chapter where the boys are in school, and Cambridge users that chapter, and there's a debate, there's a controversy as to who is better. They've just learned comparatives, qui sunt meliores, Graeci and Romani, and we talked about the story, and you sort of listed the different things that the one kid said the Greeks are better because, and the other kid said the Romans are better because, and remarkably, the teacher, who was Greek, thought that the argument for the Greeks being better was much more convincing. I can't imagine that there was any bias there, but that my one student is sort of looking at me, and all of a sudden she raises her hand. She's a senior. She's taking Latin 1 for fun. It is a terrible early 20th century imperialist chapter. But yes. So so student raises her hand and says, "But Mr. Schwab, do you mean to tell me that Latin and Greek is not the same thing?" And I said, "No, they're different languages and they're different cultures. So it's kind of like, it's kind of like English and Spanish, right? They're different languages and different cultures and people learn them both and everything." And it turns out she had taken some Spanish, but she was a little bit confused by this concept. Um, it's been many years, more than 20. But if memory serves, and memory may have burnished this moment, but her friend, who was also a senior, who was taking Latin 1 for fun, said to her in my memory, said, "Well, but you've taken, you took 2 years of Spanish with me. You know they're different." And if memory serves, although again, memory is not always reliable, she said, "Oh, that's why I didn't do so good." Well, there will be those moments. And I guess now all of us in this virtual room can think of them as "where is Hannibal" moments, because that is just such a wonderful story and such a great example of, how do you recover from that? It has been 9 years. I shall keep that in mind. It has been more than 9 years since poor little, I won't say her name, had the unfortunate incident of thinking that Latin and Greek was the same thing. And sometimes, those student questions where it's just clear all of a sudden that they have no idea, sometimes those are a momentum killer too. And it's really hard to know what to do about those in the moment, isn't it? At least, with yours, Nancy, you got to see it on paper. I'm standing there. I'm like 23, right? And I'm standing in this classroom, and I'm thinking, I am totally unprepared for this. I have no idea what to say to this child. And there's another 20 minutes of class that felt like 9 years. So what are some things that we veterans do without even realizing that we're doing it, when it's clear that the class needs a momentum shift of some sort, that something of that nature has happened, and we can't keep doing what we were doing?
I think it's important also to figure out when it's the whole class and when it's an individual student. So one of the things that I do in terms of, again, today I'm on it's writing out a bunch of questions, so I'm thinking about the sort of questions in Latin back and forth of things. But I was sometimes when I ask questions, I'll ask a question, and just so that kids have the input, I'll ask this question to Alan, and Alan will answer it because I know Alan's going to get it right? And then I'll ask Chris the same question, and all he has to do is repeat Alan's if he was listening, and then go on down the line. And I will have students who, they're the fifth person that I'm asking, and they're like, "What? Like, really? Like, here's what's on the board." And you're like, "I know you're kind of half asleep. I know it's like 8:30 in the morning, but like, in May, I asked a student, what does just quid videt quintus, right? Quid videt quintus. Picture on the board, it's Quintus, Marcus, and Julia. I use Orbert. So they've had those characters since about late September. And he couldn't tell me Marcus or Julia. And in that moment, you're just like, this is embarrassing for everyone involved. Like, I don't know how to get out of this situation right now. So I asked, and I did. It took a couple seconds. And I just went, you know what? Let's just move it. Let's just keep that question moving around the class. I'll ask someone else that. Who'll give me a simple answer that's right. And then I'll ask someone else who's like the star student who's going to say something, Quintus Marcum Juliam Pulsara with it. Like something really aces. And then I'll talk to that kid after class. Like, I'll just walk around, I'll find something quiet to do, I'll tap on his desk, and I'll say, look, we need to talk after class for 5 minutes. Because I don't do well with, I think that is a momentum deflator if it happens in class. And the best way that I know to do it is just to try to, like, get back on my board and surf through, what I've got left and try to find a moment later, because I don't handle that kind of stuff well. I will just freeze. And in my first few years, that's what would happen. I had a girl in middle of Latin 2 ask me, well, I should know, and she didn't even say I should know what that means. The kid next to her goes, you should know what that means. And she's like, I was like, oh, come on. And you question who you are as a person, let alone who you are in this profession when that happens. But then if you look around the room and you see that other kids who are struggling are going like, what is this? You go, okay, well, that's cool. Okay, it's an outlier. We're dealing with something that's like a kid who's either looking for attention by offering that behavior, or who's really just wants to take Spanish and so is failing Latin to get a different language, or what like. You have to determine whether they're outliers or whether it's like an issue. But when it's an issue and it's a whole class issue, that's a different kind of.
Yeah, it really is. It is important to know whether it's the one kid or the few kids, or whether it's everybody. And I do remember looking around this class because I really couldn't think of anything to say for a little while, and most of them were snickering, and then I thought, okay, this is better than I had feared. And so we just went on, and I don't know. I think we. I think I know what we did. I said, well, guys, I'll tell you what. Let's move back from the cultural component to the language component, and we've got the new things are first and second person plural verbs and comparatives. So let's let's see how many of those we can find, and whatever group finds make pairs or something, and whoever finds the most of them in such and so time wins a prize or something like that. Salwe, Melissa, it's good to see you. I'm glad you could join us. Salwe. So we're talking about keeping the momentum of good intentions and new plans going, and I know you've got a new situation because you've moved, to new state, new district, new school, new everything, and also that it's been a few weeks that you've been in school. How's that been going for you?
It's actually been going a little bit rougher than I had anticipated. Simply because they have me teaching one extra class without a planning period, and I'm trying to get that solved at the district level, and they're not much help. I am definitely running out of steam. That's why I wanted to join this talk today. I have two problems. One is that I'm new to the area, and two is that I come from a different culture than most of them do. And I think they're trying to take advantage of me. But they don't know that I'm a fighter and that I'm going to go for what I believe in. That's one of the good things about it. The second thing is that I've got the kids who are enthusiastic. And the high school wants me to have a full-time program next year, and so does the middle school. So I don't want to give up any classes because I'm building both programs, even though my focus is at the high school level. And I thought that I would be teaching 7th and 8th graders to feed into my high school, and instead they have me teaching 6th graders instead of 7th and 8th graders. So we're not even using the same textbook, we're not using anything the same. So I've got a lot of planning that I have to do that doesn't make sense. And a lot of things are going on that I just need some help planning and figure out. And even like they want 3-week grade reports. I don't even know how to set up my grade book yet. So that's what I'll be doing tonight, is setting up grade books and trying to put in grades. But other than that, we're going to learn how to use the language labs very soon and learn how to implement those in Latin class. And I have new teacher orientation this week as well. So that'll give me a breakup in some of the days on what I'm doing with some of the classes. I've implemented many of the things we have said in here, but I just, it's been a long road to hoe, how that is, and especially with moving to a new state and a new city and trying to get all my ducks in a row.
Yeah, that really does sound like a lot, and that extra class would just that is always a difficult thing. Um, but fortunately, having known you for a while and known you by reputation as the person that you are and the very determined fighter person that you are, I think we can fairly well predict who's going to win this.
Yeah,
And
I hope so.
it's not somebody who isn't you. That's all I'm saying. So
That's what I hope.
so
Anyone else have anything to say?
yeah, does anybody have any particular thoughts for Melissa other than you go girl because you rock?
So you do go, girl, first of all. But as far as the things that are like the mechanics of school, like using the grade book and things like that, one of the things that I did not realize until last year, which was my 4th year of teaching, was that you can sometimes search, like, so we use Easy Grade Pro, right? And you can sometimes go into YouTube and look up something like Easy Grade Pro tutorial, and it's 5 minutes. If there isn't a support person at your school, usually there's like that one guy or that one woman who are like, or a group of people. Like we have kind of we started like a welcome wagon kind of whatever without the hi at our school for new teachers because it's a very tradition oriented school, which means they just assume that you know a lot, and that's the most intimidating. But if you need to go about your day, often before they're ready to teach you, like you said, you're not getting orientation yet. You're not going to get that until next week. So sometimes you can find like screencast tutorials to use some of the just like mechanical stuff. Because even if they showed it to you a couple weeks ago and you didn't need to use it, like by the time you get your roster and you deal with that, sort of shock, you've forgotten how to use what you use because you didn't ever get the hands-on anyway. So see what you can do just for like those nuts and bolts resources.
Right, I've actually found some videos online. A fellow teacher showed me some videos for our system on how to set the grade book. And I'm going to watch those after I get through doing this. And then they're still adding kids to my class. It's 3 weeks in, and I just got 7 new 6th graders and 2 more Latin 2s and 1 more Latin 1. So I don't even know when to stop putting people in my grade book.
Well, that's a challenge. That's fun. I have taught at schools like that in my life, and if there's that kind of chronic, pervasive disorganization, yeah, that just makes it harder. It really does.
Melissa, I came into a rough situation last year as well, and I think one of the most important things is finding people at your school who can support you. So do you have a mentor at all?
They have not assigned me a mentor because I am actually not a first-year teacher.
Okay. So do you have a department chair?
I do, and she's not very good.
Okay.
Just to be honest, I've had lots of department chairs, and she just seemed, she wasn't even going to fight for me for my period that I needed back. She just was like, you got to fight for yourself.
Yeah. Have you got a union there?
That's what I'm going to look up today and make sure that I think we have the GAE, the Georgian Association of Educators, and
there should be a union rep at your school, and you need to find that person and latch on, because if you're teaching an overload, you should at least be being paid for an overload, and if you're not, then they're probably in violation of your contract. So you need that person like now.
Right.
And then the next thing I would say is, okay, are there teachers who have been more friendly than others, or have you even had a chance to say hello to anyone?
I have. There are the teachers in my department pretty much stick together. I guess most world language departments are like that because we're pretty small, and especially with Latin and French, we are generally the only one in the whole school who's teaching everybody.
Okay.
And so I found some French teachers and some Spanish teachers, some who are new, some who are not. And the older teachers seem complacent. Let's just be honest with it.
Okay. So you need to find a teacher who doesn't take the BS. You need to figure
Okay.
out which teacher that is. Consider asking the complacent teachers which teachers are troublemakers. Maybe not in so many words, but try and figure that out and then go find those troublemakers, because those are going to be the ones who understand. Now, you don't want the guy who's complaining all the time and never does anything, but if you can find a teacher who understands that there are problems with the school, you need that person to help you navigate things. I'm sure any of us would be happy to be support for you, but we can't be there in the school at the same time. We just don't know the culture, so we can't be that much help.
Exactly.
Yeah, but I guess I would say that last year with my rough situation, I came home crying fairly often. I managed not to cry in front of the students, but it gets better, or even if it doesn't get better, you kind of figure out a nice rut to get yourself into. The other thing is, if you're the only Latin teacher in the district, you probably have a certain amount of leeway. Like, is the textbook mandated for your middle school program or for your high school program?
The textbook is mandated for both, and we have standard learning objectives that they have to meet, and there are periodic tests, about one a quarter, to show their progress. And those are mandated by the county. As far as I know, I don't think they're a Georgia thing. And I have to administer the slows. That's what they call them, the slows, like we're slow in Latin or something. But we have to administer those on Tuesday to the middle school students, and they're using Minimus, and I just don't see why sixth graders are using Minimus. And they bought me Minimus and Minimus Secunda, so want me to get through both of those in 1 year with the sixth graders. And then then my Latin ones, they'll be fine because I'm teaching them from the beginning. And my Latin 2s only got to chapter 8 out of the Red Book of Cambridge last year, when they're supposed to get through the Blue Book.
Yeah, I feel that.
So I just feel a lot of stress on me right now.
I would say look at the learning objectives for all your classes and try and find the commonalities, and then find certain activities that you can do with all of them. So like maybe one day you play fly swatter with every group. One day you do a translation with every group. Because if you can streamline your planning in a way that you don't have to juggle, okay, I'm doing this and this and this and this different thing in a different period. Of course, you're going to change the material depending on the students, but if you can kind of give yourself a schedule for what kinds of activities you're going to do every day with every class and have them kind of line up, your life will be a lot easier.
That would make things a lot easier, yeah. And
someone said, I think you maybe weren't in here yet, but somebody made a very useful analogy that when you're teaching, especially in your first year or at a new place, it can feel like you're driving in the fog. Whoever said that, would you like to repeat that maybe?
Yeah, so I think I might have actually read it, and someone repeated. And then there's another one I'll share. She said, your first year of teaching is like driving in the fog. You can maybe only see a few yards ahead of you, but you can make the whole trip that way. And you'll get home safe eventually. And so it does, and you've already been through your first year of actually teaching. The other one my friend said is that sometimes you feel like King Kong, and sometimes you're like King Kong on top of the building, and sometimes you're like King Kong when he's just like trapped and doesn't know what to do. But I like the fog one, but because it sort of feels a little more linear towards towards positivity. But yeah, and I mean, to Eleanor's point, it's a really good way to lessen the burden of daily planning, and it also is good for resources, right? So if you are dealing with like manipulable in each class, then those are always out, right? You moved your tables into a circle, and they're just going to stay that way the whole day, and that back and forth does cause a lot of stress, which I'm sure that you know, but sometimes you don't remember like what it is that you need to minimize, not to make a cut on the fact that you're using Minimus, but what are stresses that you can reduce, and so that's an excellent one because it takes out problems with issues with planning and with resources and with just sort of hustle and bustle of the day. But you need to get active with your union and figure out who that is, because that they should be advocating. Chances are your union, the head of your union doesn't know this is going on, or your building rep doesn't know this is going on. But if you find them, they should be very quick to act. on your behalf, because you should at the very least be getting paid more for what you are doing.
Exactly. That's why I told them. I said, I don't mind teaching the kids. If they want to be in my class, let them come. They can certainly have a seat. But if they're making me work longer hours than the rest of the teachers so that I can get a planning period. And I found that out on Friday. And I was like, this is not normal, or is it kosher in any way? It doesn't even make sense for me to report at this school the same time the administrators report. If their school doesn't open for an hour, I'm not understanding it, and so I'm going to have to talk to someone. I didn't want to have to bust out the nasty Melissa, but I will.
Yeah, I think it's really important that that you make clear to these folks, because there's probably not any deliberate intent to abuse you, but it's just that you're the new person, and so you didn't push back, or you didn't push back in a way that somebody perceived as pushing back. So it was easy for them to do the one thing, and then it was easy to do the other thing, and then somebody says, well, she has to have a planning period, and so somebody says, oh, we'll have her come an hour earlier. And I don't know anything about Georgia union contracts at all, but I would imagine that if you're working an extended day, that you're probably supposed to be paid for that, because that's fairly universal. Mm-hmm. So I imagine that this will get itself cleared up quickly. And I love what Ellie just said. I'll read it for the benefit of folks who are watching and can't see the chat. She said, frankly, you can be nominally using the correct textbook and still teach your own sequence. Just do some readings from the text now and again, try to get some of the same vocab into them, and focus on the objectives, the slows or whatever they are, rather than on the completing the textbook. Now that is a topic that we could look at whenever the next time we meet. Should we have sessions next week because of Labor Day weekend, or should we take the weekend off because of Labor Day weekend? Yes, says Nancy, we should have sessions next week. Okay. Creative compliance, says Liz. Yes. So next week maybe we'll talk about, unless some other burning topic comes up in on Idea Exchange this week, we'll talk about how do you make it work when it seems like it's impossible. And that is that's a widespread topic, but one of the things I think that we can address is, I'm supposed to use this textbook. Ellie says, it feels weird as a Latin teacher because we're usually overachievers at heart, but your goal for a year like this has to be finding out how little you can do and still be effective. And that is so true. More time spent preparing doesn't always mean better teaching. In fact, my own story of that is that I became a much better teacher when I realized that somewhere between, somewhere in the range of 45 to at most 50 hours per week was all that I could spend on school stuff and be effective. Once I learned that, I thought, well, how do I make this work if I've been aiming for more like 60 hours a week? And I realized, okay, well, for one thing, why am I taking up homework, quote, grading it, but not really actually doing so, and returning it the next day? That takes a lot of time. I was stupid. So I said, why don't I only take up things that really need to be looked at? And then I realized, okay, if it's a formative type of an assessment, I need to see it, but do I need to take it up and carry it home with me? Probably not. If it's a summative thing, does it have to be 7 pages long? Probably not. And I'm still on a growth path with that, because it's still hard for me to let go of a lot of those things. And yes, as Ellie says, one way to reduce your labor hours is to try to be digital as much as you can if it's doable. But if you have a district where a lot of kids don't have access to the internet outside of school, that does make it harder.
It's funny that you say that, because they all use they all have phones. They all use their phones. So my best way, I found out another website to use called Padlet, because I give them extra credit if they find Latin in the modern day world. And so I have them now take a picture with their phone and send it to my Padlet address, so I have documentation to give them extra credit on their work. I told them I just can't give you extra credit for everything. You're going to have to work for it. But if you always have a camera in your pocket, then you're more likely to take a picture of something you see in Latin. and send it to your teacher, then you are to sit down and write an essay on why the eagle has pietas for the slave.
So one thing you can do if everybody has a phone, or if you have enough access to computers to provide access to everyone, is you can replace some of your formative assessments, some of your quizzes and things with Kahoot or Socrative quizzes. If you do that, it's automatically graded, and then that's a lot of time that you don't have to spend. But of course, there's always, there's one kid without a phone, and you can't leave them out of it. It's also embarrassing for them sometimes if they're the one without a phone. Yeah.
Exactly. And I don't even have a digital I don't have a digital one of those things that hang from the ceiling in my room. I'm the only one who doesn't have it in my classroom right now because they built me a new classroom, and they were taking measurements the other day to order me a projector. So I've been using one of the old projectors that I plug into my computer and projecting it onto a wall because I don't have a screen either. The kids don't like it. I don't have speakers. I don't have anything in the room, but I'm getting them up out of their seats. They're active. They're learning. Every time one kid comes into my class, he's like, Miss Travis, I am so glad that you're actually motivating us to do things instead of our other teacher who just had us sit and copy things out of the book.
I know your year sounds horrible, but it sounds like in some respects you're doing an amazing job, and you should be wicked proud of how great you're doing if you're getting feedback like that.
Oh,
like,
yeah.
Yeah,
that was what I was about
good.
to say, too. I mean, that is wonderful to get that kind of feedback from a kid this early in the year. Guess what, 3 weeks in, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I've kind of have been pimping out Latin Club and telling them that they had to join, and encouraging them to take that third year of the language instead of just dropping out at 2, and trying to build the program that way so that I can be at one school and don't have to commute and don't have to go back and forth with the grade books and with the system and 2 different diverse populations of students. I like that. The only feedback, I might not hate Latin this year.
Well, it's great, It's great to go from I always hated it before to I don't hate it now. That is a huge step. As George says in the chat, he says, yes, be proud. Even if you feel like a failure by your own standards, you are making a difference, and you definitely are. That is excellent.
I appreciate your comments. I really do. They know that I'm tired. They know I'm sick. But they know that I keep going, and that's all that really matters. Because as long as I don't give up on them, then they have one less person that will give up on them. And I've seen several people be kicked out of my classroom or be kicked out of other classrooms. And I told them, I said, if you're going to go to ISS, tell them to send you back to my classroom, because I'd rather have you in here learning than sitting in there copying pages out of a textbook.
Yeah, and that, that right there sends such a powerful message to them, that you really do, in fact, care about them. And that's much more important than whether, every form is filled out perfectly, and, and even whether you feel like you're on top of your game. The fact that you're really connecting with kids and making that kind of a difference for them is just absolutely huge. Well, my goodness. We've covered a lot of ground today, and it's been just under an hour and a half. We usually stop somewhere between now and 2 hours, but we can keep going, or we can stop, or we can wrap up, whatever you guys think. So what do you guys think?
I'm going to have to say Wale te omnes. I have to actually get back to the planning that I mentioned earlier, but good luck to everyone, and keep up the great work that you guys are doing. So I'm trying to keep the momentum.
Yes, we will definitely try to keep the momentum. So we'll say well to you, and we'll say well to Nancy, who also has to leave us. That looks like probably a sign that we should bring ourselves to a close. Does anybody have any last-minute thoughts to share before we break?
No, just thank you. I would like to thank everybody for letting me monopolize the last 20 minutes to get whatever I needed to get off my chest.
Well, that's what we're here for. I mean, we are not, it's not like we have an agenda which cannot be deviated from. A lot of what we do is mutual support, and I think that that's probably the most important thing that we can do, actually. We're all going to have those days. So I'm so glad to hear about the great things that you're doing. That's really, really exciting. So with that in mind, next week we'll talk about making things work when it seems like it's impossible, unless something else comes up or unless I can figure out a better way to express that in English. And I will also say Waleta Omnes, and thank you guys for a terrific and wonderful hangout. Viewers, thank you guys for watching, and we will see each other next time. We are stopping the broadcast now.